the inner core, the instructors were run very much like a destructive cult and very much manipulated by the leader. They believed that the leader could harm people without touch. This was the mythology within the inner core. The average member, the 90% of the people that participated, weren't part of the inner cult. So Allatra is like that. It's layers and layers. Most of the people are quite innocent that support it or donate to its causes, but they don't know who the man is that's pulling the levers behind the curtain, which is the inner core of the group. And unless you read the original book, Allatra, and deconstruct it, you're not going to get what kind of a bizarre theater this group is presenting and harmful it can be.
Hello, everyone. This is the real John Atack, and I think the real Joe Szimhart, probably. Are you the real
Yeah,
one?
I think AI hasn't absconded with my persona yet. In
Yes.
fact, I don't even know if it knows me.
Yeah.
So
No, I certainly don't want to know
I
it.
haven't tested the waters.
Mm.
But yeah, thanks for having me again, John. It's good to see you and
Mm.
see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, and it's been a while because you've relocated, and your new location is, of course,
Yeah,
a
I'm in,
secret.
yeah. So back in Santa Fe, where all this cult stuff started for me, basically,
Mm.
I stumbled into the I Am movement and the Church Universal and Triumphant and Agni Yoga the first day I was here in 1975, and that led to speculative Freemasonry through Manly P. Hall and Madame Blavatsky, and back into the primordial wisdom, and I'm back here having scrubbed myself clean of all that stuff, more or less,
Yeah.
except that I keep talking about it.
Yeah, it's weird that, isn't it? I mean, I retired from any conversation about Scientology for 17 years, and nobody really noticed. And when I came back, it was like,
Yeah,
um, and since then, I retired again in 2015. We, a big conference in Toronto, so I could retire, swan song, and it just doesn't go away. And I have to
no.
admit, and I have talked with a few people about this, that it remains fascinating. So, writing the new book, which is behind me,
Hmm.
which Spike will doubtless put on the screen, bless her. It, a lot of that material, I actually took two chapters from a piece of blue sky and rewrote them because they fitted into the narrative. And you don't want to say, now go away and read this other book I wrote, before you carry
Yeah,
on. And also a paper that I'd written about Hubbard and the occult back in the 90s. I went back through that. But I then doubled the amount of material by digging further into, this perverse story. Ron Hubbard becomes infatuated with Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis. He performs what is actually the version of the eighth degree of the
hmm.
OTO, their highest level. Aleister Crowley gets very angry about this and calls him and
Hmm.
Jack Parsons names. But he starts with this thing that is trying to summon the Antichrist fundamentally, without getting into all of the many names like Babylon and the Scarlet Woman and all of this. He's trying to summon the Antichrist to bring about the end days. That's the beginning of Scientology. So in 19
Yeah.
January and March 46, he and Parsons performed these sexual ceremonies, which involve Parsons playing with himself and Hubbard watching, trying to do this. And then years and years and years, decades go by. And in 1980, his last testament about Scientology, this secret issue, which only a few people were ever meant to see, people who had done the OT8, not the OTO8, but the OT8, the pinnacle of Scientology's bridge. And he writes this peculiar statement saying that he's without the Antichrist and Lucifer. He got an inkling of this in 1945, he says, which confirms things because that's when he met Jack Parsons. And the purpose of Scientology is to prevent the second coming of Christ. That's the whole
Yeah.
purpose, which will be carried forward by the Markabians. And during the course of writing the book, my friend Yuval Law said, Markabian, that's a bit like Merkaba. And I'm sort of, it's a bit like what? the Merkabah. You know, before Kabbalah, there was Merkabah. There was 1,000 years of Jewish
Yeah,
mysticism
yeah, yeah.
where people are trying to achieve superpowers by traveling on a chariot to see the throne of God. And once you've seen this, and for 1,000 years, people are trying to do this. So his opponents are these other people who are the Markabians, the Mercabians, or what have you. So very, very strange and fascinating.
Yeah.
And it also shows the
Yeah,
way.
so here we
Yeah,
are, yeah.
go ahead.
So yeah, the thoughts I had after reading the book Allatra, which came out within the past decade,
Yep.
um, and it's the origin story of what this cult is that we're going to be talking about, or new religion, or
Whatever we want to call it.
spin off of Agni Yoga and Theosophy, or whatever you want to describe it as. But what struck me, and maybe I'll bring this up again, is I was thinking about this whole thing, and I talk about it, is what, what the hell is going on here with all this neo-Gnosticism and the idea that Lucifer through the serpent came to enlighten mankind, not to deceive them, in the original Genesis story. And that's where this whole thing stumbles out into society in many ways. And with my new take, it isn't new, but the idea that this is all about the psychology of the human being. We have a world of religion and cults and all of this. It's part of our psychology, which is unlike other animals. We have invented this other world, and we call it Leela, we call it Maya, but it's really our inner psychology, and we play all kinds of games with this. And Plato called these things pious frauds, which he thought were necessary, like to create the society and glue people together through cults, religions, or whatever, and the gods. But what I'm looking at here is the fourth wall.
Yeah.
And when we violate the fourth wall of theater, we violate what Shakespeare brought up in The Tempest, which is, that when the curtain is drawn, all of that disappears. The gods don't exist. The magic doesn't exist. The occult power doesn't exist. People don't fly. People don't die and wake up. And this is theater. This is for your psychological entertainment. It's not the territory that you live in, which evolution grants us, and we have to struggle with all the time. So a lot of the idea of the pseudo god that created the world is and claiming that's real, that we really know that through Gnosticism, is breaking that fourth wall. It's bringing that out here. And the way it's broken most often is when people channel information directly from this other source, like Hubbard did with his OT3 thing. He broke into the other world at the risk of his own life in order to bring the truth down to us.
The wall of fire.
In other words, he broke the fourth wall. It's no longer psychology. It's no longer entertainment. This is reality now, according to that. And in a way, by bringing the gods off the stage, we kill them. We own them. They become our puppets. They no longer have a life of their own. And so when someone's channeling, like Allatra is channeling Rigdon Japo, which is the future Maitreya, the future Buddha, and it could be embodied in the current cult leader, slips my mind right now. But anyway, Daniel, whatever his name is. But what I'm seeing here is that by channeling Rigdon and claiming that he's talking to us, they're killing him. It's no longer theater. Now, if it was presented as fiction, then we have something to play with. We know there's a fourth wall. We know that there's something unreal. We're in the audience, and this is going on out there in Playland, in Harry Potter world, for instance.
Yeah.
But the cults tend to violate this all the time by claiming they have the truth, and we have to now go through all these mechanizations of meditations and workshops and expensive courses in order to prove ourselves as worthy of being in the theater,
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm just kind of summarizing what I think's going on here overall, and
Well,
And
if we could
I just found it.
take that back a little bit and explain to people who perhaps not familiar with the concept of Gnosticism and neo-Gnosticism. And this
Yeah,
goes back to somewhere around the time of Christ, possibly somewhat before, because the Gnostics were not necessarily Christian movements like, Valentinus and what have you, that not necessarily. But the idea was that, and it just passes on from the old mystery cults, which go back to the Eleusinian mystery cults, which go back to about 1200 BC or something, BCE, long time back. And the idea is that you'll go through a series of initiations, a series of rituals, and at each stage you'll advance further. Now, with the Misties and with the Freemasons and probably the Rosicrucians and many of these offshoots, which are fairly modern, the Rosicrucians beginning somewhere just after 1600. There's nothing before then. They always claim to go back to Egypt. They talk about the Book of Thoth, the Emerald Tablet. I got into that
yeah,
in the book I've just written. And this concept of a Lucifer, of a Prometheus, of somebody who brings wisdom to mankind that mankind is not meant to have. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life, the Sephiroth. So the idea is that you go through these progressions, and eventually, as far as I can work out from reading about mystery cults, and it's where the word mystery comes from, the Misties, is that the final thing will be the resurrection from death. So you'll have,
yeah.
I think Freemasons call it the grave of fire. You can actually be put into a coffin. You can be taken deep underground. These cults may go back to, Altamira and Lascaux, tens of thousands of years that you're being taken into a space where you're going to be given an experience. Among Australian Aborigines, you still have the initiation sometimes for sort of 12, 13-year-old boys, where they will scare the living daylights out of them so that they will be passing into manhood, which is the state where there is no fear, which you can also find,
Yeah,
say, amongst
interesting. The Native American initiation.
the Apache.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
I
Native
think of
American
immediately.
initiation rites do similar things here
Yeah,
in the Southwest. Yeah.
and you're making a contract with the other world. When we translate the name to crazy horse, the word crazy means somebody who is living in the spiritual world. That's the origin of it.
Yeah.
That he was what these days we call a shaman, even though they're really just in Siberia. But there's this idea of the shamanic, the direct contact. And you can get somebody to have these amazing experiences, as we know, by getting them to stare at things, repeat words over and over, chant, drum, all sorts of things, fast, go without sleep. There are all sorts of ways of getting somebody to have this,
There.
what appears to be a mystical experience. And there may well
Well,
be
it's
such
it's
things.
it's 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 touching death and touching schizophrenia. I mean, these are the two
Yeah.
things that we touch when we go into entheogenic experience like ayahuasca or whatever.
Mm.
You pass through something, the oneness of life. I mean, death has always been the emergence back into the oneness of life for all life forms, whether it's a
Mm.
blade of grass, or King Tut. I mean, it's just it's rather simple, although very deep in its concept. And so we get lost in the weeds trying to make sense of it by
Mm.
doing all these rituals and religions and whatever, I
and
think.
and and then achieving
Um,
this
yeah.
narcissistic belief that we are permanent and superhuman, that we are spirits that will go on forever, that we will live in heavenly bliss or suffer in
Mhm.
terrible hell or what have you, or be reincarnated or enter
Yeah.
nirvana or
So I just want to make it clear to the audience here that we're not against human beings doing that. It relieves our tension, our anxiety. It allows us to function. These are useful ideas, but can become very binding and very dangerous and very confining
Mm.
ideas. And that's basically what we're concerned about is
Yeah.
the problem of knowledge is where does it come from? Is it deceptive? Is the person mentally ill? Is it, are they making this up and not admitting it? This is the problem. It might be part of their revelation, but they have to admit that maybe they're wrong, or some parts of it are wrong and they need to be adapted and so forth. And I think that the great religions have adapted over time to the social territory of what it means to be human, rather than forcing an idea onto a culture through fascism,
Yeah.
which is what the problem is, I think, here. Yeah, the back to our topic, Igor Danilev, he's the founder of this thing, and this whole thing started. He claimed to have a spiritual awakening in 2002, much like what we're describing. You know, he had a gnosis, a grokking, or something, and then he borrowed a lot, obviously, from a lot of other places, along with the writer of his book, Anastasia, who's the author. She's also known as Heine Yablachina, or I can't pronounce these names very well, but anyway, Danilov is now the Holy Spirit according to the inner cult. He's like God here, much like Jesus was the Holy Spirit after he died. He became the Paraclete. He became the Holy Spirit, and so now we have him in an embodiment again as this character Danilov. So. That's where the problem starts, is his claims. And then there's this, in my Kindle edition, 850 pages of rambling dialogue between Anastasia and Rigdon Yapo. So it's like a long-winded Thus Spake Zarathustra, but without the
poetry of the intelligence.
The quality of literature. Yeah. Yeah. So And it's as if there's a God's eye view coming through Rigdon Japo about what science is going to do, what our brains are like, where we came from, where we're going, the mistakes that other religions made. But there's an insertion, a definite insertion of the Gnostic myth in there that it criticizes Christianity for persecuting the Cathars and all of that, which is typical of the New Age movement.
And the Nazis, the Nazis spent a great deal of money on trying to get to the Cathar story, the Albigensian story. Now historians are actually questioning a great deal of what's gone into the record about that and what happened. What we can say, for, again, anybody who's unfamiliar, in the Languedoc, the south of France, around Toulouse, there was a movement, allegedly, that, and I say this is being questioned now, that rose up, called themselves the Cathars. Their priests could be women. They were called parfaits, or perfect people, and they had to act perfectly. The Roman Catholic Church under Innocent III at this time, this is the 12th century, declares the first genocide against another people on behalf of the Catholic Church. And the idea that we have, and it may not be accurate, is that they were completely wiped out, these people, over a period of about 50 years, tortured, burned at the stake. Got rid of, and they've become an obsession subsequently for so many groups. Everybody is like the Da Vinci Code. Everybody wants to claim that everyone that ever went before was a part of their secret society, and so people go back to
it's kind of like the lineage of that the Gospels imposed on Jesus of going back to Adam. There's two versions of it in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, but the idea there is that if you can go back to the origin story, it makes your story true. And this is what, for instance, Cosmism in Russian politics is doing. They want to pretend that they were the original true human beings that came from some Nordic area or from some Turkish area where Garden of Eden is. So this idea that we are part of the original people, therefore we have the primordial wisdom of those original people. I find it fascinating in my hippie generation that so many people got infatuated with the Native American myth, and they wanted to be part of it. And people tracing that they might have 1 ounce of or 1% blood, Native American blood, made them more spiritual. That
got
kind of
Elizabeth
shit.
Warren into a little bit of trouble, but
she got into trouble with it too. And so we did
a show about this, didn't we? A year or so.
Yeah, we did talk about that. Yeah, that was interesting. But the idea that even a symbol like the swastika comes up quite 22 times within Allatra book. And and I'll just read this briefly. It says that the book revisits the history and meaning of the swastika, mentioning it 22 times, pointing out that it was used as a symbol of fortune and energy, which everybody knows. It goes back through Navajo and Tibetan and whatever. You can find the symbol everywhere. The Theosophists didn't originate it.
No, I
And
think the oldest one they found is about 13,000 years old. Joseph Campbell talks about it, and he reckons
yeah,
it's a symbol of the four seasons, the calendar turning.
yes, I would think it. In fact, Allatra goes into one of their basic assumptions is about these four aspects of man, and it's part of their ritual therapy in order to improve your soul is to pay attention to these 4 points. So that's why they go on and on about the swastika. And they want to reintroduce it as a charm, as having power in itself if you meditate on it and look on it, whether it's spinning right or left or whatever. I don't know.
Mm,
They talk about the negative and positive,
mm,
the kind of fundamentalist interpretation of what the symbol means. But they've ritualized, they try to re-ritualize it again, try to diffuse its Nazi negative connection, kind of like the Raelians have. They've
yeah.
adopted the swastika also. Raelan is cult. So I think that the way that Allatra group in its inner core uses it, because this group has many, many layers. There's a lot of people that support it that have no idea what the origin story is.
Mhm.
They support its, for instance, climate change stuff. Even though this group is in its reality is arguing that there is no such thing. They believe in the climate change hoax, but they're out there helping groups that are promoting the idea that there is climate change. In other words, to help bring enlightenment to the world. So they're playing both ends of the
Mm,
game here somehow. But anyway, I just they're playing with the swastika also as if it's a charm,
mm.
as if it has magic power, and again breaking the fourth wall, bringing theater into reality in their inner core workshops and belief system, and so they're a little bit crazy, like Crazy Horse, in that sense.
Yeah, I think what that what you say about the fourth wall is very, very important, and we're thinking about that. The brilliant British playwright, English playwright Dennis Potter, who's known for Pennies from Heaven and The Singing Detective and Blue Remembered Hills and lots of things. I became fascinated with him. Everybody did. He'd come from a very poor background in the Forest of Dean, a mining community. He'd gotten to Cambridge, some on a scholarship,
Well,
So, and as soon as he graduated, he made a TV documentary. He was straight into you know, the the limelight about the Forest of Dean, in fact. And he started having his plays accepted. And you got this bizarre situation where this guy who was most definitely an intellectual, a very high-powered intellectual, who was writing plays, and on a Wednesday night at 8:30, working men would say, "I'm going home to see armchair theatre at 9 o'clock on the television." He was so incredibly popular. And what he put forward was really a merging of the imagination and let's call it the imaginarium. So he would have characters who were hallucinations. He would have characters who might have come, from beyond. I became really interested in this, and I wrote a novel in the last century called Voodoo Child's Light Return, in which I
mhm.
called the spirit of Jimi Hendrix back around that time to be involved in what is actually a home counties English middle class cult who believe they're reincarnations of the Canasta people, who are a tribe who disappeared from the Cherokee. And they have come to wreak vengeance upon white people for what they did to the Cherokee. So you've got this character of Jimi Hendrix. And by the end of the book, what I hope is that the people don't know whether he's a hallucination that one character is having or whether he's really appeared and Dennis,
Yeah.
that's from Dennis Potter. It's like kind of Play It Again, Sam by Woody Allen. That this sort of, well, we are actually living inside this imaginarium. As
Mhm.
I'm told Kant said, I'm never going to be clever enough to read him, that there's the real world outside, but we each of us live in our own personal interpretation of it. So each of us live in an
Oh,
imaginarium, which has all sorts of religious. I can remember being in the cathedral in St. Petersburg and watching this old woman kiss an icon, and the fervor, the peace that she evidently felt from doing this. And to me, it's, oh, that's very unhygienic. That's all I can think about it.
yes.
But people have worlds of symbols, and those symbols become powerful to them. And yeah, the swastika,
Mm.
there's one right behind me on the cover of my book, has come to represent it's I had when I was still living in East Grinstead, I had a Baptist minister, and we worked with churches together in East Grinstead, and the Catholics and the Baptists wouldn't be in the same room, but never mind. But this Baptist minister said, "Can I exercise your house?" And I went, "Oh yes, you know me." And
Uh-huh.
he said, "Oh, you've got to get rid of those books, those Aleister Crowley books." I said, "Well, they're necessary to understanding Ron Hubbard, who studied them." And he said, "No, they're full of demons." I'm going,
Yes. Yeah.
okay. I don't experience reality in the same way that you do. Uh, and I didn't know how to say that to him, so I just nodded and smiled. But this thought of living in a world full of jinns or demons or angels or spirits, and the majority of human beings to this day are living in that world. They're living in a world. There was a survey of atheists in the 1990s, and 80% of them, although they didn't believe in God, did believe in magic and the supernatural.
Yeah.
So there are very few
For
people who are
bringing that
not.
up,
Yeah.
what's interesting about Russia and the Soviet Union, because they banned God, right? There's no
Mm,
religion. It's
yeah.
untrue. And they wanted to have a quote scientific society, which was bullshit.
Based on genocide.
They
Yeah.
had good rocket science, but at the same time, they had this weird cosmological cosmism belief going on. But what was interesting is, you can try to wipe out heresy and all of this, but you can't wipe out human psychology. This stuff reemerges every generation. We come up with gods and goddesses and oneness and experiences, and people write books about it and whatever, and try to create new religions. But the two most popular TV shows during that era in the 70s and 80s in Russia were psychics that communicated with the other side. They were just fascinated with it, and to a great extent, you go to MK Ultra. Even the governments, the so-called atheist governments, were fascinated with this otherworldly power. In other words, breaking the fourth wall. And they spent countless millions of dollars trying to find people that had this power. And of course, they were fooled by a lot of psychics that claim
And
to have this power.
Scientologists.
Yeah, and Scientologists
Yeah.
and whatever. And my
Ingo
cult,
Swan,
Church
principal
Universal and
among them. Yeah.
Triumphant. Yeah, my old cult, Church Universal and Triumphant, was full of this stuff. The magic power of words. We could change the weather, change our health, and whatever. And if it didn't work, we didn't do it properly. We had to go
Yep.
back and do the ritual again.
That's it.
So the Allatra's use of charms and symbols as having in negative and positive power to influence our spiritual nature as opposed to our animal nature. They're very hung up on animal nature and how it
Mm.
can drag us down. There's like
The
animal nature
id.
lives in 6 dimensions or something, and whereas the spiritual nature goes to 72 dimensions, and this is what they're trying to reveal is that they're aware of 72 different dimensions of reality. That we don't, and we only live in 3 or 4. Most of us ignorant High Lake folk, or with the
Mm.
Gnostics called mud people, we just can't grasp what 72 dimensions is. We live in 4 or 3 dimensions. So
Lucky
it's all
us.
of this grandiose imposition of imaginative psychology on the rest of the human race is what's going on with cults like Allatra. It's alarming that they've gotten their tentacles in so many places that people aren't aware of right now. I don't know if they're having that much power, but for instance, there were a lot of representatives at the June 2nd, 2025 Congressional Prayer Breakfast here in the U.S. And it was reported on Allatra's website. There was there was a Russian hostess for one of these events there. Um, anyway, the Faith and Freedom Coalition was infiltrated by Allatra. Some of the attendees were like Paula White Cain, special government employee and key advisor to the White House, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. So they're Dr. Alveda King, part of the Martin Luther King family, state representative and American activist was there. So Senator Ted Cruz. I mean, the list goes on. These people have met with the Pope, the current Pope. So there's connections going on here, which people I know in Europe that understand this much more clearly than Americans apparently do, are tracking right now, because there's a way, in a way, the Allatra group is kind of a useful idiot for powers that be to spread propaganda. And the idea here is to promote a kind of theocracy or autocracy and get rid of this cumbersome democratic nonsense that we've tried to come up with for the last 200 years. I think that's a big part of the push here.
Yes.
Is the theocratic agenda. And there's only a few people at the top that are going to be in power, but the people that follow this stuff are kind of like wounded narcissists that want to have that power. So they want to have somebody that can rule over society in power. And so we have this same psychological impulse. We want kings. We want someone to take care of us. We want someone to dictate reality to us. We want life to be simpler and more easy than the messiness of debate and trying to work toward, what we've mentioned before, a more perfect union, the constant up and down and sharing of information and willingness to compromise. I think part of this whole movement behind Allatra is to get rid of that, is to dictate reality from above.
Yeah, and I mean we've not actually achieved any real democratic societies yet. And I mean, I'd say Joe Campbell's hypothesis that when he went looking to find if the collective unconscious actually contained all of this mythology, and he, to his own disappointment, determined that all of the stories had traveled along these lines, out to India, out to China, out to Egypt from Sumeria, that you could trace the stories, you could say. And the Sumerian idea is basically you have a supreme god who rules gods. You then have the representative of God on earth, who will have various names, many of them deriving from the word Caesar, Kaiser, Tsar, Shah. And this person embodies godliness, the divine right of kings. And we saw this fought over and a head lost over it with Charles I in the 1640s in this country, where he asserted that he was king because God had made him king. I think it's the second letter to the Romans where this comes forward and is used, in fact, by the International Christian League, the family who tell young interns in Congress that Hitler was actually a decisive person, and God had appointed him leader because it says so in Romans 2. You get into all sorts of nonsense about this desire for a parental figure, a father, this, which basically says, you haven't grown up yet. As long as you still want somebody to boss you around, and you've understood that they might be cruel and they might be capricious, they might be really nasty, but you want somebody to tell you what to do. That's because you haven't developed a self. You haven't actually become an adult in the world. That's my view. I know it was Eric Fromm's view as well. And for the majority, and you've got a society that now has such sophisticated marketing, advertising, and spin. The way that you can actually determine an election through niche marketing to people through their email to get them to not vote or to vote for who you want. It leaves us in a great confusion, I think.
Yeah, I think you're correct. It's, again, part of our human psychology. There's always children with the same fears growing up in every generation. Yeah. And those fears can be tapped and whatever, the denial and the fear of death. there's this book by Arthur Dykman. He wrote Us and Them a long time ago
Yeah,
about
very
the
good
cult
book.
problem.
Very good book.
Yeah, I thought it was very good, and I liked his 4 points of define what a cult behavior is like and why it's dangerous and harmful. But he uses a story from Snoopy, the cartoon, to introduce the problem. And there's these characters, the Snoopy characters in the back seat, and the parents are driving, and one of them wonders, what's going to happen to us when our parents die? Who's going to drive the car? And so, we tend not to grow up. Like, who's going to drive the car of our nation? Who's going to drive the car of our club? Somebody's got to drive it. And so we got to come up with these leaders, these kings, these pharaohs, and we hope they're appointed by God because we want them to be correct and right and righteous. And that projection, that childish narcissistic projection, allows people that want to take advantage of that to operate and manipulate that projection. I think that the MAGA people around Trump have done that considerably well, manipulating that childish urge. Who's going to drive the car? We want somebody decisive. We want somebody powerful. We want somebody. We don't care if they lie. They just have to be in charge. Because we want to be in the back seat. And we want to ride along.
Delete
and so that Snoopy cartoon
Epstein
brought
files.
that out for Dykman. I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah.
And the sense of certainty, the feelings of knowing, that the desire to be right, and which we run up against so frequently. The example, everybody who watches this probably heard me say it at some point. When I was 17, a born again tried to bring me the light of Jesus or what have you, and we had I thought, a perfectly friendly conversation for 2 hours, and at the end of it he backed away from me looking a little bit alarmed. I was only 17, and he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. I don't understand, but I know. And we all live our lives this way, and the willingness to accept that, to say that there are things that I am pretty sure of because I have evidence, and there are things I believe because I want them to be true. But, and I mean, John Hunter in Manufacturing Mania gets, has a really good take on the way that dopamine is held back in the brain through stress, and you then release it, and people get really high, and then using the fervor that they've now got, and we go to Yuval Noah's work on that, which is on this channel elsewhere, that you can manipulate people because they got high, because they had an experience of euphoria. They'll come to believe your interpretation. You gave them experience. If you go and stare at the wall for a while, you'll start feeling trippy. Yes, you will. You can call it mindfulness if you want. You can call it zazen. You can call it whatever you want, or you can call it underexcitation of the brain, so that feedback loops are created and you start to hallucinate, and you can go, wow, I've just hallucinated. That must be the truth. That must be the way. That must be the life. It's like, no, you've just hallucinated. And we attach our feelings to things, and that feeling of contentment that daddy's driving the car, I don't have to worry. Daddy's driving the car. We can trust daddy. Now, daddy has actually lost his license. What can I say? He shouldn't be driving the car, and he's drunk. Yeah. It's like, get out of the car if you can. Put the handbrake on. And so, yeah, we do want this certainty. One of the things that I got to, which I haven't really written about, I started finding more and more, why did Madame Blavatsky believe this? Because I quite respect her. I think she was pretty smart, very well read, spoke 9 languages that I can count, but was completely misled, absolutely, utterly, completely misled, because what she said about the past is not true. There wasn't a 1,000,000-year war on Earth where there'd be something left over after a million years of war. Civil war here and civil war in the US, 4 years. There's lead all over the place where those wars were fought on the battlegrounds to this day. So 1,000,000 years of war, there'd be a lot. What she said about the future didn't happen. How she describes genetics, there's a red Adam and a yellow Adam and descended from, it's nonsense. We know this through genetic work. But this demand to make sense of the world somehow, realize that you can't, and then go and find somebody who's certain that they have And as you say, when you do the rituals and they don't work, and here's a little tip, they won't work, folks. When the rituals don't work, it'll be
Yeah.
your fault because you were pointed the wrong direction, or you hadn't used your nose clippers, or something that you had to do that was part of the ritual was missed. And it
One of the things going on here, I think, is unfortunately, after working for 26 years in a psych hospital system,
Mhm.
there are you notice that there are people that have personality disorders. There's a reason why that's in the DSM, and they're born somehow with this. It might be a genetic malfunction, or it might be handed down by a parent that was an alcoholic, or
Yeah.
whatever. But there are some people that are born brats, or just not easy to deal with. And Blavatsky was one of those people.
Mm,
Hubbard was one of those
mm,
people. He's an inveterate liar all of his life,
mm,
apparently. And Blavatsky had this outsized personality, was an anomaly in her family, was very, a high bred family with
mm,
some mother was an accomplished writer.
mm,
Her mother on her deathbed, the one of the last things she reportedly said was, "What's to become of poor Helena?" This brat teenager that they had. And of course, we know the history of Helena, which is very colorful, to be
mm.
kind.
Yeah.
But she was very difficult to get along with. She could uh, tell the truth, be humorous, and tell a bald-faced lie all in the same sentence. She was a very capable person, and obviously good at what would have been proto-hypnosis,
Mm,
back in those days, getting people entranced with her stories. She could do guided meditation by talking as if Moria or Kuthumi or whatever was talking through her, writing letters through her. Could be very convincing to some
mm,
people. Like Abraham Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people all of the time, and she was capable of that.
mm,
So we have that model, and that continues to emerge in what we call cults.
yeah.
We call them all kinds of names, but I call them autocratic, self-sealing social systems. But it's hard to remember for some people. Cult is easier to say. So I think that's what we're dealing with Allatra here. It is very a clever group in that it disguises itself in layers of influence.
Mm,
One of its main disguises is called creative society.
yeah.
And much like Agni Yoga had the system of living ethics, it's a very positive thing to have a creative society or living ethics. It's a good mask to wear in public, where you can get all kinds of people to join. I'm reminded of the martial arts cult I dealt with for many, many years, Chung Wu Kwan, run by John C. Kim.
Mm,
They had these very elegant martial arts studios.
mm,
And there was about 20 of them in Texas and Boston and Chicago. The inner core, the instructors were run very much like a destructive cult, and very much manipulated by the leader. They believed that the leader could leap 7 times in the air without touching the ground. They could harm people without touch. I mean, this is the mythology within the inner core. The average member that supported Chung Wu Kwan, 90% of the people that participated, weren't part of the inner cult. They had
mm,
no idea this. They may have heard some stories that he was the champion of all Asia, which was totally bogus. There was never a champion of all Asia. But so Allatra is like that. It's layers and layers. Most of the people are quite innocent that
mm.
support it or donate to its causes, but they don't know who the man is that's pulling the levers behind the curtain, which is the inner core of the group.
Mm.
And unless you read the original book Allatra and deconstruct it, which I've been trying to do, uh, and did somewhat in my review, you're not going to get what kind of a bizarre theater this group is presenting,
Mm.
and how harmful it can be.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
a thing that really struck me. I watched a lot of stuff about and read a certain amount of Carl Gustav Jung while I was preparing this book, because there was a theme. I mean, my theme is fundamentally that if you believe absurdities, you can commit atrocities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is I'm not the first person to say this, but it is true nonetheless. And realizing how beliefs develop and how people come to justify doing harm to other human beings as an aspect of goodness, that it becomes ethically proper to, so the Nazi regime, as it attacked the Romani, the Jews, and of course the Slavs, the pan-Slavism, pan-Germanism, it is a fundamental that continues to this day through Allatra and other groups who are supporting Dugin and the neo-traditional philosophy, which we've also talked about in the past, with this idea of returning to a serf-based society, a feudal society, that it worked well then. And anybody who's actually read history knows it did not work well. There was tremendous slaughter. There was tremendous disease, poverty. It was just awful. The idea of funding campaigning.
And people didn't bathe. People didn't bathe. They stunk back then.
Yeah, but it's true. So thank God we're not going to have to go back there. But yeah, maybe that should.
I like my showers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea not to be infested with lice. But Himmler gave a direct order to the SS, the Waffen-SS and the Allgemein SS, 1.25 million troops before they went in under Barbarossa into Eastern Europe. He said, kill 30 million Slavs. Because of this notion of Aryan superiority, and the whole purpose that Hitler had put forward was Lebensraum, living space. They had set up places, and they started occupying them during World War II to create new societies that would be pure Aryan societies. And it was necessary to kill 30 million Slavs. Now, on the other side, we have pan-Slavism, all of this rising up in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the 19th century as they fragmented. Believing that there's a pure Slav race, believing that you can get back to, a Slavic Adam. I don't know whether he's the red one or the yellow one. I get them mixed up. And that there is this racial purity. And out of this will come, and the Nazis poured tremendous resources into this, out of this will come a pure people with supernatural powers. There will, wisdom will rise up, and God will send emissaries, and everything will be absolutely lovely. And we can see the opposite, the other side of this coin is the belief in Silicon Valley, that the singularity will unite all computers, that AI will become God, and that all we'll have to do is do as we're told by the AI, and everything will be lovely.
This Allatra virus has infected that too. Its tentacles have reached into certain people that support Silicon Valley and the Trump organization, and they mutually support one another. And I wrote in my review about the idea that this is kind of like speculative philosophy. Speculative Freemasonry was something which was the occult side of Freemasonry, which exposed the truth of existence and after death and all of that. And they call it speculative for a good reason, because most Freemasons don't buy into that. They belong to the club, they do what they do, and okay. So this is kind of like, I think, the speculative side of the human being. And again, when we take that fictional side, our ability to create the myths and to live by them, and bring too much of it, and maybe it's a matter of overvaluing it, not so much having some of it in the fourth wall. Like, it's nice to have a Ganesh in your house if you're Hindu by nature. In fact, most Hindus I knew have, whether they're secularists or true believers, have a Ganesh in their house. It's just part of like having an American flag in a classroom or something.
Just have an elephant on the wall.
But then to impose upon that Ganesh magical power that you do a ritual and you get pissed off because your child died after you prayed to Ganesh. I mean, now you're carrying it way too far. Now you've allowed the fourth wall to take over. You've entered the theater. You think you're one of the gods, that you can pray to this stone carving and heal someone through that. Now you've gone beyond speculation. You've gone into true believer mode that Eric Hoffer talked about, the danger of neo-fascism, to become a true believer. And I think that's what we're talking about, is overvaluing all this. Not that it doesn't have some value, to have a statue in your house or some belief system or whatever. I mean, we kind of need it. Atheism is a belief system. It glues some people together. It gives them a sense of purpose.
But they,
So
in this country, they get together on a Sunday and sing hymns about there not being any God. And
yeah,
Richard Dawkins proposed that they should all have a T-shirt with a scarlet letter A on it.
yes,
And you're kind of going,
yeah.
have you heard of Nathaniel Hawthorne? And Hester Prynne? Obviously not. Not a
Yeah,
culture of lot, these atheists.
I think basically we can't stop ourselves. This is what we used to call the human condition back in the hippie days, and
Mm.
that we have this condition. We are psychological beings. We make shit up, continually. And some of it is quite beautiful. I mean, we have the arts, the buildings, and even the sciences have begun to extend into us knowing more about the territory we live in within ourselves and outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
But we can carry that way too far, like the speculative philosophies of Peter Thiel, for instance, in his Silicon Valley Antichrist nonsense that he's been talking about.
Destroy the orcs or
Yeah.
whatever it is that's happening to him. How utterly bizarre that. I mean, the other thing, anthroposophy, of course, is moving into these circles, so that Silicon Valley people, we hear, deny devices to their children, which is a good thing because it means when they inherit the hundreds of billions, they won't know how to use a computer. But they're denied that, and they're sent to Waldorf schools where they're taught pseudoscientific nonsense coming from Rudolf Steiner, who's one of the fascinating characters in this particular landscape, a man who
Steiner, I think, is kind of one of those hidden names. Anthroposophy and Gurdjieff also. There's some Gurdjieff influence in Allatra.
Yeah.
The idea that you can model human being like through an enneagram or whatever, and then perfect the self by going to workshops and meditating and your chief feature and whatever, and bumping yourself up into a higher octave, into super sensible dimensions. The idea that there's 72 dimensions in Allatra is very aligned with Rudolf Steiner's idea of the super sensible worlds that he himself claimed to somehow represent, kind of like Ridley Japo and the Allatra book claims to represent. So you have these themes, these psychological, theological themes continuing to erupt in new cults. So in a sense, there's nothing really new there. It just sounds new to a naive reader.
Yeah,
that might read the Allatra book.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just sounds new to them. It sounds rational to them that they bring out all this science, and that it's nice to believe that the entire Christian church, the Catholic Church, got the Jesus story wrong. I mean, how much power does that give you to know that? It's very appealing to that kind of person that wants to overcome churchianity and whatever they call that sort of thing. And when you ask them, what do you mean by churchianity? They get caught up in kind of a 101 class that they took for 3 credit hours, and supposedly know a lot more than everybody else now about churchianity. So we a lot of it is just misinformation, being malinformed, that get people caught up in this stuff.
Yeah, and there's a guy called Robert Kaufman who I knew in the last years of his life. And he wrote, when he left Scientology in the 70s, and was the first person to publish the contents of Operating Thetan Level 3 about Xenu and the body Thetans in a book called Inside Scientology, not to be confused with a book called Inside Scientology by Janet Reitman. And at the end of the book, he has this beautiful thing. I mean, he went crazy. He was in the first tranche of customers who did the OT levels in Scientology, and he wound up in an insane asylum. And I've had a number of clients that's happened to, a number of people I know who've had terrible experiences trying to pretend that they're infested with millions of little body thetans. But he made this I thought very good comment at the end of his book. He says, "So I left the science fiction world of Scientology and re-entered the science fiction world of reality." That there isn't a constant true place to go. In the end, you are going to have to work out what you believe. And that's adulthood, that's growing up, that's kind of, and I personally, I long ago came to the conviction that I was never going to work it out. It was that simple. I was never going to work it out.
So, I think that's a good insight that you're never going to work it out. But, and this is why I go back to W.R. Beyond, who did his work with groups in the 40s of neurotic soldiers that would form groups to solve problems. And he noticed that inevitably among that neurotic group, the narcissist or the pathological one would end up as the leader.
Mm.
And we have that in politics where if you have a neurotic society, they always elect the wrong person because they're acting out of, they want somebody that's willing to lie to them, and tell them everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
If you just listen to me. So, Beyond's idea that what's the solution to the basic assumption state where people fall into these dependency patterns and false assumptions about reality. And he called it the working group. So I'm taking off on what you said. You're never going to work it out, but you continue to work at it. That's Beyond's solution, is that you have this group, democratic, that work the system to find the best solution. And we know this, I think, instinctively. Any business knows in order to run itself well, it has to work things out based on the reality that's around them. They can't make shit up too much. And if they lie too much about their product, they're going to get caught. It's going to blow up. Much like Hubbard lying about his product, it's blown up in his face. He's left a horrible legacy behind.
He has, but aspartame is still on the shelves, even though the FDA declared it a toxin in 1979. But because
all I'm saying is we have to keep working at this. Don't give up. Keep working at. Keep voting. Keep educating yourself. Keep working at this. And I think that's what the democratic process is supposed to be, even though it collapses and fails sometimes. The idea is to, do the hard work. It's not easy. And it's not easy to know who to trust. I've often told my clients in cult things, I said, freedom isn't going to come to you without knowing who to rely on, because you can't do it all yourself. Unlike, the self-salvation cults tell you that you have to work out your own salvation. You have to continue meditating. You have to continue, and then you're going to end up with a perfect solution. Well, we are social beings. We live in a shared reality, and there are some of us that are better at some things than others, and it takes work to find out who those people are and to have some trust in them. So I think Beyond's idea of the working group as the healthy human being is what's operative here in terms of solving this problem, and I think it's what we've tried to do as exit counselors or whatever in this cult business, is to get people to work at the solution, with us during the conversation, because they can't make a decision unless they've worked it out somehow. They can't just believe what I've told some of them. Well, you seem to know that this is a cult, so I guess I should leave it. I go, hold on. I go, we're not even close to what we're trying to get to here. You need to understand why you're making the decision to leave, and I don't think you understand yet. As far as I'm concerned, you should stay in, and I should go home if that's where you're going to leave it. So I've told people that 100 times or more.
Yeah, and it's arriving to put, for me, I for 40 years believed in the concept of enlightenment. I was talking about this with my friend Steve Moffick the other week, and he went, "Oh yes, the Enlightenment. That was really..." No, I'm not talking about the 18th century philosophical movement.
Yeah,
Steve, I'm talking about, I believed that there would be a moment of samadhi, satori, illumination, and I would grok the fullness of everything. And then in my 50s, which is quite a long time ago, about 13 years ago, it just fell away. And the anxiety of not being enlightened fell away. The understanding that it seemed very unlikely that I would ever understand the purpose of the universe or the meaning of the universe. I've been reading Robert Graves' Hebrew Myths, the Book of Genesis, with Raphael Patai, and it's fascinating seeing all of the many micro interpretations of what's going on in there. But one of them is in a midrash or somewhere where there's a description of God pinning down the corners of the firmament on the earth and leaving the north flap loose so that anybody who believes their God can prove it by pinning it down. And we've gone from a universe that had 6 planets and the sun to, where were we? The James Webb Telescope has now taken us, Hubble took us to 10,000 recognized galaxies. James Webb has taken us to 780,000 recognized galaxies. Our own galaxy, the Milky Way, has 100,000 million stars in it. God pinning down the firmament. I kind of realize that if God there is, God is way beyond my comprehension, way beyond my comprehension, and probably wouldn't want to be worshipped. You know, this kind of narcissistic God that is portrayed throughout so many religions of, you know, you've got choirs of angels all going, "You are the greatest, you are the greatest." It's like, I don't think that's what God's like. You know, I think God is probably, you know, a bit more interesting than that. And
well, I think the possibility is that that's a metaphor for what the divine thing is, but our metaphors are limited. You know, they're as limited as maybe the distance of the moon from the Earth as opposed to the vastness of the cosmos. You know, we're not even close to what that is. And I think that's where the humility comes in, is that we just kind of bow to whatever that is and try to die peacefully.
yeah,
So,
and accept that our understanding is limited. And for me, that, you know, last week I saw a performance of Mahler's First Symphony, and one of my youngest was with us, and he was saying, you know, something about, you know, the purpose of humanity or what have you, and are we a good thing and all of that. And I said Mahler's First Symphony, and it was only the first. He carried on beyond that. In all, he wrote 11, though they're only numbered to 10. I just sat there going, wow, we're worthwhile. Our species is worthwhile. We can do that thing. And then you look at the awful things we can do and you go, well, yeah, rather than having a fixed and fervent belief that says, I know everything, having the fluidity to say, to adopt the scientific method, which is, let's keep testing things and let's adopt one principle, that the reverse of the Nazi principle. The Nazis taught about life unworthy of life. So let's teach that all life is worthy of life, and let's particularly teach that human life is worthy of life. And, you know, look at our symbiotes that, you know, get rid of the mosquitoes, things I don't like, tsetse flies. But once that fundamental principle of our tribe better than your tribe, it's all right for us to kill you, your vermin, that principle, once, and you can tilt any religious belief. Look at the Buddhist monks in Myanmar and Sri Lanka who've been killing people. And they're Buddhist monks, the Tibetan monks who took up arms against the Chinese, against the Dalai Lama's order. You can still go and do this even with that. Or you can follow the Prince of Peace and have all the guns blessed on your way in. So it's where things become, I suppose, it's Eric Fromm again, isn't it? Life affirming and life denying. Where things become life denying, then we're in trouble. And if that means that we've all got to build our own ballroom, then so be it. You know, for every man a ballroom. That's what I believe. Where we can dance to the YMCA till the cows come home.
Yeah, but just don't make it gaudy.
Yeah, nice plain ballroom.
Talking about the
and don't knock down your favorite American building to do it. No. Yeah, so it goes.
Yeah, where are we going, John? At least we're talking about it. That's important. So
yeah,
thank you.
And the final point on Jung, which I'm not quite getting to. Do you know the Red Book?
Yes, I read it. I mean, I've looked at it. You know, I don't know if I understood it, but I've
translation,
seen it.
Hopefully. This thought that, and it really came through to me, and I have written about it in this book, that certainty. There's a point where Captain Bill Robertson, Hubbard's devotee, casually says that the Chicxulub asteroid that hit caused the end of the dinosaurs, we think, 20-kilometer crater that goes under the Yucatan Peninsula. Captain Bill casually says, well, they've got their date wrong because they've dated it 66 million years. And that's because there's a layer of iridium that you can actually measure. You can radiocarbon date. And so that's why they say, scientists, that it's 66. And he says, Hubbard checked it on the e-meter. So it's actually 75. And you kind of, I checked it with my imagination. And my imagination says, because of course the e-meter measures what you feel. It doesn't actually measure truth. It can't tell you that you're lying to yourself. It can't tell you, it. So yeah, it measures something. But then going, Madame Blavatsky, Jung and alchemy, that high-level Jungians, psychiatrists around the world who are Jungians, are allowed access to the secret level of Jungian teaching, which is the alchemic level. And this guy had the largest private collection of alchemical texts of anyone in the world. In fact, there are very few libraries that come anywhere close. Jung had a library of 5,000 books, and he collected medieval and once the Gutenberg press had got going, anything he could. And he believed that all of these symbols in these books were genuine. He didn't believe there was any such thing as the imagination. And when you start getting into that, then you get Madame Blavatsky and Gurdjieff, and it's but my favorite thing.
In a sense, Jung violated the fourth wall to an extreme degree, as if he was going to bring the fire from the gods like Prometheus down to man. I think that he had that kind of hubris. But
for a muse of fire.
People still kind of admire him for it. I find it kind of comical anymore. At one time I was a Jungian. I think he came up with a lot of very interesting, useful ideas. But he can be, again, using the word overvalued. It's easy to overvalue Jung if you're not careful.
Yeah, I don't think he came up with a lot of useful ideas. I think the shadow and the anima animus, what comes out as the Myers-Briggs personality test, these ideas of fixed personality, he believed you can't transform personality. I think they're all very dangerous ideas, and it's so closely interwoven that it's hard to differentiate. I think he and Freud were, in fact, the most dangerous thinkers of their period and had the most malign influence of anybody upon the 20th century. But that's a topic for another day, probably.
Well,
probably do that in 2 minutes.
I take your point. Again, we're dealing with human psychology and how to influence it, and they certainly did.
And
they
how?
influence the way we think of ourselves.
Yeah.
And in a sense, we're still working out how to purge that from our language.
Yeah.
We use terms like collective unconscious and subconscious, and we're still struggling with what those things mean when they possibly could mean nothing at all.
Yeah, I agree. I've railed against the use of the term unconscious mind. I accept that there are unconscious processes, but I don't think there's a central collective mind that's doing them. And I don't mind subconscious because we can penetrate the subconscious. The idea that dreams are the royal route to understanding, what we now understand about dreams as involuntary reactions that are taking place through 3/4 of our sleeping time as glial cells are cleaning out the brain, that how much depth of meaning there might be in dreams. Occasionally there may be some insight, but these poor people are destroying their sleep by waking up to write down their dreams, and so they're never actually outside of the dream state, because that's what happens if you don't get enough sleep. You're partly dreaming all the time because brain cleaning is happening. It's straightforward stuff. But things like transference and projection, they're quite interesting ideas. The division of id, ego, superego, it's an interesting idea, but we have to be careful. We have to move forward, and we certainly have to move away from the libido thanatos idea. I want to screw it, or I want to kill myself, being the two.
I think some of Freud's earlier followers, broke, like Otto Rank, for instance, broke with him about the primary ideas of the sex impulse and the Oedipus and all that. And he saw death maybe as more important than that. So they built on Freud and deviated from him quite a bit, all of these things, including Bion. And but we have to move on, and I've got to move on now too, because I'm getting hungry.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, fantastic talking with you, and thanks everybody for watching. Write some comments, be nice about us, go and buy my book. And don't try and elect me your leader. Thanks so much, Joe.
And all right, thank you. Have a good day, John, and we'll talk again. Bye-bye.
Yeah, we will. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. It's a good idea not to be infested with lice.